Hi everyone, William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri 1915 diary series. I'm going to try and keep everything straight today. I don't know why I find these so entangling, these short diary entries. So yesterday, in the previous video, we covered diary entries for the 28th, 29th, and 30th of June, so we're done with June. These are not full diary entries. Dmitri is just making notes, but it's very interesting to see the people whom he's encountering and spending time with. So in those last three diary entries, we had appearances by Natalia Borisova, by the Dowager Queen of Greece, whom Dmitri just called a babushka because she was his grandmother, and Nicholas and Alexandra, who were apparently in a good mood, and then this odd appearance of Pavlo Skoropadsky, who was a Cossack leader and would be the leader, of Ukraine, the head of state. I don't know what you would call it, the hetman of Ukraine after the revolution, I think, in 1918. Okay, and we had, of course, Dmitri leaving for Stavka, so that's where we resume. We're not in Petrograd anymore. We've been there for quite a while. Now we're in Baranovichi, which is a city in Belarus. It's a real city. I think today it has a population of over 100,000. So it was not like being out in the middle of nowhere at all, not a city like Petrograd, but still a city. And we're going to see that life was not hard, generally speaking, at Stavka. There were lots of things to do. And the duties of an adjutant weren't onerous, so it's not going to be that big of a change in lifestyle for Dmitri. Make what you will of that. Now today I have diary entries going from the 1st to the 7th of July, so that's a full week, but we'll have to wait and see if we make it that far. And it's not actually a full week because we jump from the 3rd of July to the 5th of July. The 4th is skipped. So, 6 days. Anyway, we'd better get started. 1st/14th July, arrival in Baranovichi, lunch at Stavka, Stana, Milica, tea and dinner, read in my quarters, discussed Dot and Madame Soldatenkova. Kotzebue sang. Okay, actually quite a lot to do with this one, to fill in the blanks. So some of you will have recognized the names Stana and Milica. These were the infamous Montenegrin sisters, daughters of the king of Montenegro. I think his name was Peter, and they married Stana, who was in her 40s at this time, married Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich, who was at that time the supreme commander of the Russian military. And her sister Milica married Grand Duke Pyotr, who was Nikolai's brother. So 2 brothers, 2 sisters. And Milica was the older of the 2. She was 49. And they have this connection with Rasputin, that they were the ones who initially brought Rasputin to court and arranged the introduction with Alexandra, and they were quite enthusiastic about him for a while. But then that, I haven't looked into why. I have a couple of books on Rasputin, so I could have refreshed my memory. I didn't. Why they decided that Rasputin was a bad actor. Eventually, apparently, and he was, and eventually they saw through him. But Alexandra didn't. And I wonder, Dmitri writes explicitly in opposition to Rasputin as early as 1910. But I wonder if being at Stavka, because the people around Grand Duke Nikolai Nikolaevich they were mostly Genstabis. They were people who, like Nikolasha himself, had graduated from the General Staff Academy. They were much more forward-looking and much more pragmatic than the people other people. I mean, that the General Staff Academy was notorious, not notorious, but was well known to produce officers who were very practical minded and forward looking and no nonsense kind of guys, and they would be the ones, along with Nikolasha, who would successfully push Nicholas to abdicate in 1917. So at this particular Stavka in Baranovichi, before Nicholas II took over, it would have been, kind of an anti-Rasputin camp. So maybe that influenced Dmitri, but as I say, he had already, going, 5 years before this, he'd already been talking about Rasputin as, a kind of disgusting and problematic figure. Okay, he tells us he read in his quarters, and he doesn't tell us what kind of quarters he had. Probably pretty modest, because I know I've read about Nicholas II's quarters, and he actually shared a room with Alexei, but he doesn't tell us if his quarters are outside of the Stavka sort of campus or complex, or inside, or what kind of quarters they were. So yeah, unfortunately. Now, when he says there are a lot of, I'm afraid there are a lot of difficult to decipher things in these diary entries. He wrote them in pencil, and there are a lot of words that you just can't make out, and other things that, because of the way he's writing these as notes and not explaining, it's just a shoulder shrug. So in this instance, he says he discussed DOT, and DOT is an abbreviation. So that's another problem with these notes, is that there are a lot of abbreviations. So DOT, D-O-T period, and why would he discuss him, her, it? I don't know. And then the next reference is to Madame Soldatenkova, and she's a significant person. Now, it has often confused me, the fact that sometimes she and her husband are referred to by the surname Soldatenko, and sometimes Soldatenkova. So my guess is, without having researched it, that they were Ukrainian, and they used a Russified surname sometime, or the opposite, that they, or rather not both of them, this was her married name, so he was Russian and used the Ukrainian form of his name sometimes. Who knows? Maybe he came from a family that was mixed Ukrainian and Russian. But, that's by the by. The real reason why she's a person of interest, her name was Alexandra Yosifovna. Her husband's name was Alexandra Yosifovna. The husband was Alexander Vasilievich. And the reason she's a person worth noting is that, if I recall correctly, and I believe I do, one of the things that a complaint that was made about Dmitri at Stavka, I think by Alexandra, I don't know how she found out about it, was that he was spending, an inappropriate amount of time with her. She was, I don't know what age, but if I were to guess, I would say probably in her 40s or 30s, seems to me. Where is her husband? I don't know, but he does end up spending a lot of time with her, so we can kind of keep track of that as he's at Stavka. Okay, and another noteworthy thing is that she would be, and her husband would be, factors in his life in immigration. The first time he saw her after the revolution was, of all places, at a Buckingham Palace garden party in 1919. And then her husband would end up being someone at, not the main person, but someone important at the Imperial Russian Embassy in London, and it continued to be maintained for years. It can, it through the 1930s. I don't know where the funding came from, but they had it, and so they helped Russian immigrants a lot who were stateless persons to get, passports and visas if they wanted to travel, and so they will be very much present after the revolution in Dmitri's writings. The last person who's mentioned is Kotzebue, Alexander Pavlovich Kotzebue. He was 39 at this time. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's certainly not Russian. It could be Central Asian. I'm not sure. But anyway, the reason he's there is because he was an adjutant to Nicolasha and apparently had a good voice. So let's see. The next diary entry, the 3rd/the 16th of June, has one of these frustrating missing words, morning blank. And then the only other thing is lunch at Stavka. That's it. Okay, so we move right on to the 5th/18th of July. Dmitri went to liturgy. He didn't do that very often. He went to church. Actually, I should read what he has written here. Liturgy, period, lunch with the Cossacks, feast day of the 2nd Sotnya, rode to blank. I had tea there and afterwards went to the cinema. Supposed to leave Stavka for the Guard Corps, postponed. There's fighting there. Okay. So, yeah, he went to church. I should look it up and see if it was a Sunday, but there may have been a liturgy on the occasion of the feast day of the 2nd Sotnya. So, Sotnya, I'm not sure how, was it like a company? It was part of the main unit, the main military unit, like the equivalent of a regiment, I think, in the Cossack military service. They had their own sort of ranks and system. Cossacks were kind of, they had a very interesting role because they were farmers, they were peasants, but they had an obligation. If you were born a Cossack male, you had an obligation to start training fairly early on, and then to be incorporated into a sotnya and the larger unit. And so you were partly a farmer, partly a soldier, and those things were intertwined, and they were almost all in the Ukraine. And Dmitri was not a Cossack, but he seems to have admired the Cossack. At one point in 1917, he talked about maybe joining a Cossack unit. So, and this is an example of him beginning to do sort of more Romanov activities, more activities as a representative of the imperial family. So, they wanted to have Romanovs, one or more, at their feast day. Quite understandable. Maybe Nicolasha and his brother were too busy. Maybe they came. Dmitri doesn't say, but Dmitri goes to it, and that's, probably part of his official function. I'm not saying he didn't enjoy it, but he would have been there not as a friend of somebody, but as the representative or a representative of the imperial family. So one of the things he's going to be doing a lot of while he's at Stavka, at least for the rest of the summer, is riding, going out and taking a ride, one or two rides every day. So that's what he's doing here after the celebratory lunch with the Cossacks. But again, a blank. We don't know where he was riding to. That's all right. Probably pretty short ride. The cinema is going to be another important activity for him in Baranovichi, kind of an outlet. He's not going to the theater, he's going to the cinema. He doesn't seem to really have gone to the cinema. I think there's only one reference to him going to the cinema in the winter part of 1915. But now apparently they had a good cinema in Baranovichi, so that's going to be a place he goes. And apparently the officers from Stavka were not banned from seeking this kind of entertainment. They could go in their uniforms to the cinema. Unlike I think I mentioned before, on one occasion when he was had his commission in the British Army and was wearing his uniform, and he was temporarily in Mumbai, in Bombay, and he tried to go to the cinema there, and he was turned back, and told that an officer in uniform in the British Army in Mumbai isn't allowed to go. And so he found a way to sneak in, Dmitri being Dmitri. But yeah, apparently that was not the case at the Russian headquarters. Okay, and then there's this interesting reference to that he and other people were supposed to leave Stavka temporarily to go to the Guards Corps. Why? Well, there are lots of photographs from this time period of Dmitri handing out medals. So it would have been something like that. His regiment was part of the Guards Corps, but it's clearly not, that he's going to be leaving Stavka and rejoining his regiment. It's that he was going to be, fulfilling some official function. But it was postponed because there was fighting there. So, I don't think we should use that to cast aspersions on Dmitri, because I don't think he was the one who made the decision, and I don't think he was going alone. So, it would have been something that affected a group of people. Anyway, I'll stop there. So much for getting through 6 days. We have gotten through 3 days, and that's not bad. So he is going to end up making this trip to it's actually to Poland that he'll be going, to a town called in Russian Siedlec, and I just have no idea how to pronounce it in Polish, but I'll spell it for you when we get there. And we're going to have more Soldatenkova, and all kinds of interesting things. If we get far enough, we're going to have we're going to find out that the time he was spending in St. Petersburg with Ella Benkendorf had a component to it that we'll talk about. Other ladies as well. So these are not, if they were full diary entries, it would be great, but as it is, they're not uninteresting, at least not to me. So I hope to see you next time.